The fog rolled across the Caribbean waters like a burial shroud, thick and grey as old canvas. Captain Rhys Calder stood at the helm of the Hollow Mercy, his weathered hands gripping the wheel with the absent precision of a man who'd sailed these waters for 20 years. The dawn light struggled to pierce through the mist, casting everything in a colourless, dreamlike haze that matched the emptiness in his chest. His ship was silent, too silent. Once these decks had thundered with the boots of 30 men, their voices raised in song and curses. Now only the creaking of wood and the whisper of wind through torn sails kept him company. The ghosts were louder than any living crew had ever been. Rhys pulled his coat tighter against the morning chill, his dark eyes scanning the horizon out of habit rather than hope. His face was carved with lines of sun and sorrow, a black beard streaked with premature grey, framing a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. At 42, he looked a decade older, a man slowly dissolving into the sea that had taken everything from him. It had been 9 months since the fever swept through his crew. 9 months since he'd watched strong men reduced to shivering, delirious shadows. 9 months since he'd sewn the last body into sailcloth and committed it to the deep, standing alone on a deck that should have been crowded with mourners. The Caribbean sun had beat down mercilessly that day, indifferent to his grief. He'd made an oath then, spoken to the uncaring sky and the patient ocean. Never again would he bring another soul aboard. The sea had judged him and found him wanting. Every man who'd followed him had died. The Hollow Mercy would remain a ghost ship, crewed by one haunted captain, sailing toward nothing in particular. Waiting for the day the ocean finally claimed him too, the fog began to thin as the sun climbed higher, burning through the mist in pale golden streaks. That's when Rhys saw it, a shape materializing from the grey like a vision conjured by his loneliness. A ship, listing badly to port, her sails hanging in tatters. No movement on deck. No sound but the slap of waves against her hull. Rhys's jaw tightened. Derelict vessels were common enough in these waters, abandoned by crews, fleeing storms or sickness. He should sail past. Whatever story that ship held, it wasn't his to read. He'd learned that lesson in blood and salt water, but something made him adjust his course. Perhaps it was the unnatural stillness of the vessel, or the way she seemed to be waiting, patient as a spider in its web. The Hollow Mercy drew closer, and Rhys could make out the name painted on her bow, half obscured by grime and seawater, the Judgment. How fitting, he thought bitterly. As his ship came alongside, Rhys dropped anchor and stood at the rail, studying the silent deck. The Judgment was a merchant vessel, built for cargo rather than speed. Her wood was good Caribbean mahogany, though neglected. Ropes hung loose, barrels had rolled and spilled their contents. But no bodies, no blood, just abandonment, as if the crew had simply vanished into the fog. Then he saw her, lashed to the mainmast, her body sagging against the ropes that bound her, was a woman. Her dress, once fine linen, hung in salt-stiffened tatters. Her dark hair, tangled with seaweed and crusted with brine, fell across her face. Her skin, golden brown beneath the layer of salt and sun damage, was marked with bruises that had faded to yellow and green. She wasn't moving. Rhys's heart, that cold, dead thing in his chest, gave a single hard thump. He turned away, gripping the rail until his knuckles went white. Not his problem. Not his responsibility. He'd sworn an oath, but his feet carried him to the boarding plank anyway. He told himself he was only checking for salvage, for supplies he could use. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, familiar as rum. The deck of the Judgment groaned under his boots, wood swollen with seawater. The morning sun was fully risen now, burning away the last of the fog, and the heat was already building. The Caribbean in October was unforgiving. Rhys could smell the salt, the rotting fruit from burst barrels, and beneath it all, the copper tang of old blood. He approached the mast slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for the cutlass at his belt. But there was no danger here, only silence and the gentle rocking of the ship on calm waters. Up close, he could see she was young, maybe 25 or 30. Her chest rose and fell, barely perceptible. Alive then, somehow alive despite days, maybe weeks, exposed to sun and storm and the cruel indifference of the ocean. Above her head, nailed to the mast with a rusty spike, was a piece of parchment. The edges were curled and stained, but the words were clear enough, written in a bold official hand. "Let the sea decide her fate." Rhys stared at those words for a long moment, his throat tight. He knew this punishment. It was old, brutal, and supposedly abandoned by civilized nations. Leaving someone tied to a drifting ship was a death sentence dressed up as divine judgment. Let the elements, the sun, the thirst, the storms, decide guilt or innocence. Let God, or fate, or the uncaring ocean choose whether they lived or died. The fact that she'd survived this long was either a miracle or a curse. Rhys wasn't sure which. "Leave her," he muttered to himself, his voice rough from disuse. "Walk away. You swore." But even as he said it, he was pulling his knife from his belt. His hands moved without conscious thought, sawing through the thick rope that bound her to the mast. She collapsed forward, and he caught her awkwardly, her weight slight but solid in his arms. Her skin was hot with fever, her breathing shallow and rapid. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed. They were the color of honey, gold-brown and startling in her gaunt face. Her cracked lips moved, trying to form words, but only a dry rasp emerged. "Easy," Rhys heard himself say, the word strange in his mouth. He hadn't spoken with gentleness in so long. "I've got you!" Those honey-colored eyes tried to focus on his face, confusion and fear warring in their depths. Then they rolled back, and she went limp in his arms. Consciousness fleeing, Rhys stood there on the sun-baked deck of a ghost ship, holding a half-dead woman he'd sworn never to save, and felt something crack in the fortress he'd built around his heart. It wasn't much, just a hairline fracture, but it was enough to let in a sliver of light, and with it, a whisper of the man he used to be before the ghosts came to haunt him. He looked up at the cloudless Caribbean sky, so blue it hurt to see, and spoke to whatever gods or demons might be listening. "I'm breaking my oath. If this damns me, so be it. I'm damned already." The ocean offered no response, only the eternal rhythm of waves against hull. Rhys adjusted his grip on the woman, her head lolling against his shoulder, and carried her back to the hollow Mercy. Behind him, the Judgment rocked gently in the swell, her duty done. Her cargo delivered. The lonely pirate, who'd sought nothing but an empty horizon, had found something the sea had cast up from its depths. Whether she was salvation or destruction remained to be seen. But for the first time in 9 months, Captain Rhys Calder felt the stirring of something other than grief. It might have been hope. It might have been fear. Either way, his solitude was over, and the ocean had decided his fate as surely as it had decided hers. The first 3 days passed in a fever dream. Rhys set up a makeshift sickbed in his cabin, the only space on the hollow Mercy that didn't remind him of dead men. He'd cleared it of everything except the essentials. A narrow bunk, a chest for his few possessions, a table bolted to the floor, and a single chair. Now a stranger occupied his bed, while he kept watch from that chair, catching what sleep he could. The woman thrashed and muttered, her fever burning so hot he feared her skin would crack like sun-baked clay. Rhys did what little he knew, having learned basic medicine from necessity during his years at sea. He dripped water between her cracked lips, bathed her face and arms with seawater to bring down the fever, and changed the bandages on the rope burns that encircled her wrists and torso. The marks told their own story. She'd fought against those bonds, struggled until her skin had split and bled. The bruises scattered across her body spoke of violence before the binding. Someone had beaten her, then condemned her to die slowly, publicly, with the pretense of divine judgment. On the morning of the 4th day, the fever finally broke. Rhys had dozed off in his chair, his head tilted back against the wall, when a voice, hoarse but clear, pulled him from uneasy dreams. "Where am I?" His eyes snapped open. The woman was awake, propped up on one elbow, staring at him with those unsettling honey-colored eyes. In the morning light, streaming through the cabin's single porthole, he could see her more clearly. Even ravaged by her ordeal, there was a strength in her face, a set to her jaw that spoke of stubbornness and will. Her skin, now that it was clean, was the warm brown of someone who'd spent their life under the Caribbean sun. She looked like she might be from the islands themselves, mixed heritage visible in her features. "My ship," Reese said, his voice gravelly. "The Hollow Mercy, you're safe." Safe. She repeated the word like it was foreign to her, then laughed, a bitter sound that ended in a cough. "There's no such thing anymore." Reese poured water from the pitcher on the table and offered it to her. She took it with shaking hands, drinking greedily, until he gently pulled the cup away. Slowly. "You've had nothing but what I could get down your throat for days." She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You pulled me from the judgment." "I did. Why?" It was the question he'd been asking himself. Reese looked away, focusing on the worn planks of his cabin floor. "Damned if I know. Moment of weakness, maybe. Most men would call it mercy. I'm not most men." He stood abruptly, needing distance. "And this ship doesn't know the meaning of mercy, despite her name. Who are you?" "Captain Reese Calder." He turned back to face her, crossing his arms. "And you?" She hesitated, and he saw calculation flicker behind her eyes. Whatever she'd been through, it had taught her caution. Finally she said, "Isla. My name is Isla. Just Isla." "For now, yes," Reese nodded slowly. He recognized evasion when he heard it. He'd practiced it enough himself. "Fair enough. You want to tell me why someone tied you to a mast with a death sentence nailed above your head?" Isla's face hardened, her fingers gripping the rough blanket covering her. "I was betrayed." "By who?" "Men in uniform. Royal Navy." The words were spat like poison. "They came to my village on Martinique 3 weeks ago. Said they were looking for information about pirate routes, smuggling operations. My father, he was a harbor master, he knew things. When he refused to talk, they—" Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard. "They killed him, right there on our doorstep. My mother, too, when she tried to stop them." Reese felt something cold settle in his gut. The Navy's methods in hunting pirates had grown increasingly brutal. He'd heard stories, but hearing wasn't the same as looking into the eyes of someone who'd lived through it. "They thought I knew what my father knew," Isla continued, her voice steadier now, hardened by anger. "They questioned me for days. When I wouldn't or couldn't tell them what they wanted, they decided to make an example. The captain, a man named Bartholomew Gaines, he said I was complicit in piracy. Said the only fair trial was God's trial." Her laugh was sharp as broken glass. "So, they tied me to that ship and set her adrift in the shipping lanes. 'Let the sea decide,' they said. 'Let God judge my innocence.'" "But God didn't judge you," Reese said quietly. "I did. Maybe you were the answer. Maybe the sea sent you." She looked at him with those intense honey eyes. "Or maybe you're just a man who couldn't leave someone to die. Either way, I'm grateful." Reese shifted uncomfortably. Gratitude was the last thing he wanted. It implied connection, obligation, all the things he'd sworn to avoid. "Don't be. I haven't decided what to do with you yet." "What do you mean?" "You're a fugitive from the Royal Navy. That makes you dangerous cargo." He moved to the porthole, looking out at the endless blue. "The smart thing would be to put you ashore at the nearest port and let you disappear. They'll find me." Her voice was flat, certain. "Captain Gaines, he's got a reputation. He doesn't leave loose ends. And I'm the loosest end there is." "Why? What makes you so important?" Isla was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I lied to them. I do know what my father knew. And if the Navy finds out, every pirate, every smuggler, every free sailor in the Caribbean will be hunted down and hanged." Reese turned sharply. "What are you talking about?" "My father kept records. Detailed records of every pirate captain who used our harbor, every smuggling route, every safe haven from here to Jamaica. He did it for insurance, protection. Thought if he ever needed leverage with the authorities, he'd have it." She looked down at her hands. "But the Navy doesn't want leverage. They want extermination. If Captain Gaines gets those records, he'll have the map to destroying every free man on the sea. Where are these records?" "Hidden. Somewhere the Navy will never find them without me." She met his eyes. And I die before I tell them. I die before I let my parents' deaths mean the destruction of everyone else too. Rhys felt the weight of her words settle over him like a shroud. This wasn't just a woman in need of rescue. This was a powder keg with a lit fuse, and he'd just brought her aboard his ship. If the Navy was hunting her, if they suspected what she carried, and then his solitude was about to be shattered in the worst possible way. "You've put me in an impossible position," he said, his voice hard. "I didn't ask you to save me." "No, you didn't." He ran a hand through his salt-stiffened hair. "But here we are." Isla struggled to sit up fully, wincing at the pain in her rope-burned ribs. "Then put me ashore, like you said. Give me a boat, some supplies, and let me go. You can go back to your solitude and your ghosts. My ghosts." Rhys's eyes narrowed. "What do you know about that?" "This ship feels like a tomb. You move through it like you're already dead, and you talk to people who aren't there. I heard you during the fever. Heard you arguing with someone named Willem about whether to save me or let me die." She tilted her head. "Who was Willem?" "My first mate." The words came out harder than Rhys intended. "He died 9 months ago. Fever took him and 29 others. Left me alone on this ship." Understanding dawned in Isla's eyes, followed by something that might have been pity. Rhys hated it immediately. "Don't look at me like that," he snapped. "I don't want your sympathy." "I wasn't offering sympathy. I was thinking you might understand." She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "We're both haunted, Captain." "Both carrying the dead with us. Maybe that's why you stopped for me. Maybe your ghosts told you to." Rhys wanted to deny it, to tell her she was wrong, that he'd stopped for no reason at all. But there was truth in her words that cut too close to the bone. He had been arguing with Willem's ghost, or his memory of Willem, ever since he'd seen that ship in the fog. "Get some rest," he said finally, moving toward the cabin door. "You're still weak. We'll figure out what comes next when you're stronger. Captain?" He paused, hand on the door latch. "Thank you. For going against your oath. For letting the ghosts convince you." Rhys didn't respond. He stepped out into the brutal Caribbean sun, closing the door behind him, and stood on the deck of his empty ship. The ocean stretched in every direction, blue and beautiful and merciless. Somewhere out there, the Royal Navy was hunting. Somewhere, Captain Bartholomew Gaines was looking for the woman below decks. The woman who held the power to destroy everything the Navy hated most. And Rhys Calder, the lonely pirate who'd sworn never to save another soul, had just put himself directly in the path of that destruction. The ghosts whispered in the wind, and for once, Rhys couldn't tell if they were warning him or urging him forward. 6 days after Isla came aboard, the sky began to change. Rhys had sailed the Caribbean long enough to read the signs. The way the wind shifted to the northeast, the peculiar yellow-green tint to the horizon at sunset, the sudden stillness of seabirds. A storm was coming, and not the brief tropical squalls that passed like angry gods. This would be something bigger, meaner, the kind of tempest that could swallow ships whole. Isla had recovered quickly, her strength returning with the resilience of someone who'd survived worse than fever. She moved about the deck now, insisting on helping despite Rhys's protests. She'd learned the rhythm of the ship, the way the Hollow Mercy creaked and groaned, the tasks that needed doing on a vessel crewed by only 2 souls. "You should teach me to sail her properly," she'd said that morning, standing at the rail with the wind whipping her dark hair. "In case something happens to you." "Nothing's going to happen to me," Rhys had replied, but they both knew it was a lie. Everything happened eventually. The sea saw to that. Now, as the barometer in his cabin continued its steady drop, Rhys stood at the helm and watched the wall of clouds building to the east. Behind it, lightning flickered like artillery fire. The air pressure made his skull ache, and an old wound in his shoulder, courtesy of a Navy musketball years ago, throbbed with the promise of violence to come. Isla emerged from below decks, carrying rope and canvas. She'd been helping him secure everything that could move, lashing down barrels and cargo, preparing for the chaos ahead. She looked at the approaching storm and then at him. "How bad?" she asked simply. "Bad enough. We'll need to reef the sails, batten everything down. Could blow over in hours, could last days." He adjusted their course slightly, angling away from the storm's projected path. "We'll do what we can, but in the end, the sea will decide." Those words, the same words that had been nailed above her head, hung between them. Aisla's mouth tightened, but she nodded. "Tell me what to do." They worked together as the wind began to rise, as the first heavy drops of rain started to fall. Rhys found himself grudgingly impressed by her capability. She learned fast, asked smart questions, and didn't flinch at the hard work. More than that, she anticipated his needs, moved with an efficiency that spoke of intelligence and observation. "You've been on ships before," he said. "Not quite a question. My father taught me. Said the sea was in our blood going back generations. I grew up on boats in harbors, surrounded by sailors and their stories." A sad smile crossed her face. "He always said I should have been born a man. Would have made a fine captain. You still could. Plenty of women have sailed as pirates when the world wouldn't let them sail as anything else. Like Anne Bonny, Mary Red, Isla secured a line with a practiced knot. I read their stories, always wondered if I'd have their courage if it came to it." "Courage is just fear that's learned to swim," Rhys said. "You've already proven you have it." The storm hit just after sunset, transforming the world into howling chaos. Rain came down in sheets so thick Rhys couldn't see the bow from the helm. Waves rose like mountains, lifting the hollow Mercy up toward the black sky before dropping her into valleys of churning water. Thunder cracked so loud it felt like the world splitting apart, and lightning turned everything into brief, stark snapshots of violence. Rhys lashed himself to the wheel, his muscles screaming as he fought to keep the ship's bow pointed into the waves. If they turned broadside, they'd roar. If they rolled, they'd die. It was that simple. Idla had disappeared below, securing the cabin, checking the bilges, doing the 100 small tasks that kept a ship from becoming a coffin. Hours passed in a blur of rain and wind and the raw terror that came from battling something infinitely stronger than yourself. Rhys's hands were bloody from the rope, his clothes soaked through, his body shaking with exhaustion. But he held on because that's what you did. You held on until the storm passed or the sea took you. There was no third option. Then, in a brief lull between waves, he saw it. A ship appearing like a phantom from the rain and spray, not adrift like the Judgment had been, but under sail, running with the storm. And even through the chaos, Rhys recognized the lines of her hull, the way her sails were rigged. Royal Navy frigate. And she was changing course toward them. "No," Rhys muttered. "Not now. Not like this." But the universe, as always, ignored his wishes. The frigate was closing, and despite the storm, despite the suicidal conditions, she was signaling. Rhys could see the lanterns flashing in a pattern he remembered from his days before piracy, when he'd sailed merchant vessels that obeyed the law. The message was simple. Heave to. Prepare to be boarded. Isla burst from below decks, her eyes wide. She'd seen the ship too. "Is that them?" "Navy frigate." "Could be coincidence. Could be they're looking for shelter from the storm. Or they're looking for me." She gripped the rail, water streaming down her face. "Captain Gaines commands a frigate. The Retribution. If that's him, then we've got a choice to make." Rhys glanced at the approaching ship, then at Isla. "I can try to run. In this storm we might lose them. Or we could heave to, let them board, play innocent. I'm just a merchant captain caught in bad weather, with a wanted fugitive in your hold." Isla shook her head. "The moment they search the ship, we're both done. You for harboring me for—" She trailed off, but they both knew how that sentence ended. The frigate was closer now, close enough that Rhys could make out figures on her deck. They were disciplined. He'd give them that. Maintaining station in conditions that would have scattered a lesser crew. "Whoever commanded that ship knew their business. What do you want to do?" Idla asked, and there was something in her voice, a note of desperate hope that made Rhys's chest tighten. He looked at her. This woman the sea had given him. This woman who'd brought light and trouble in equal measure to his floating tomb. He thought about his oath, about his dead crew, about the 9 months he'd spent wishing the ocean would take him too. He thought about Willem, his first mate, who'd always said that living meant making hard choices, and dying meant running from them. I want, Rhys said slowly, to tell them to go to hell. Isla's eyes widened. You'd run? Even knowing they'll chase us? Even knowing what it means? I pulled you off that death ship for a reason. Maybe I didn't know what it was then, but I know now. He gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the life of his ship humming through his hands. I'm done letting other people decide who lives and dies. The sea didn't decide your fate that day, I did. And I'm deciding it again now. They'll hunt you. You'll be a wanted man. I've been a wanted man before. A grim smile crossed Rhys's face, the first real smile he'd felt in months. Besides, I died 9 months ago with my crew. Everything since has just been haunting. Maybe it's time I came back to life. Thunder cracked overhead, and the decision crystallized. Rhys spun the wheel hard, bringing the Hollow Mercy about. The ship groaned in protest, waves slamming against her hull, but she answered. She always answered. Hold on, he shouted to Isla. We're running! The Navy frigate responded immediately, coming about to give chase. But Rhys had 2 advantages. A smaller, more maneuverable ship, and the absolute nothing to lose of a man who'd already been to the bottom and climbed back up. He sailed like a demon, using every trick he'd learned in 20 years on the water, pushing the Hollow Mercy to her limits and beyond. Isla worked beside him, following his shouted orders, adjusting sails, managing lines, becoming the crew he'd lost. And in the chaos of wind and rain, and the pursuing ship's cannons starting to boom behind them, Rhys felt something he hadn't felt since before the fever took his men. He felt alive. The storm raged through the night, and the Hollow Mercy danced through it, always just ahead of the retribution, always slipping away when capture seemed certain. By dawn, when the rain finally began to ease and the wind to calm, the Navy frigate was a distant speck on the horizon, unable to match their desperate speed. Rhys and Isla stood at the rail, exhausted, soaked, battered, but alive. The morning sun broke through the clouds, painting the water gold and pink, and for a moment the Caribbean was beautiful again, forgiving again. You chose me over your solitude, Isla said quietly. Over your peace. I chose life over death, Rhys replied. Turns out they're not always the same thing. She looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his breath catch. Gratitude, yes, but also recognition. The acknowledgement of one survivor to another. 2 people who'd been condemned by others and saved by choice. What now? She asked. Rhys looked at the horizon, at the endless blue, at the freedom that came from having nothing left to lose. Now we disappear. We find somewhere the Navy can't follow. And then you tell me everything about those records your father kept, because if we're going to be hunted, we might as well make it worth their while. Isla smiled, and it transformed her face, made her look young again, hopeful again. You're going to regret saving me, Captain. Probably, Rhys agreed. But at least I'll regret it while living, not while waiting to die. The ghosts were quiet that morning. Maybe they'd finally found peace. Or maybe they were just watching, waiting to see what the lonely pirate and the woman from the sea would do with their second chance at life. Either way, the Hollow Mercy sailed on, no longer a tomb, but a vessel of defiance, crewed by 2 souls who'd each been condemned and each been saved by the only judgment that mattered, the judgment of human compassion over cold law. The ocean stretched before them, vast and dangerous and beautiful, and for the first time in 9 months, Captain Rhys Calder sailed towards something instead of away from it. 3 weeks after the storm, the Hollow Mercy lay anchored in a hidden cove on the western coast of Hispaniola, sheltered by mangroves and accessible only to those who knew the treacherous reef passage. Rhys had used this haven before, back when his crew was alive, and he'd needed places to lie low between ventures. The jungle pressed close to the water's edge, thick and green and alive with the sound of birds and monkeys. It was as far from civilization as you could get without leaving the world entirely. Isla sat on the beach, her bare feet in the white sand, staring at a leather-bound journal that had seen better days. The pages were water-stained and salt-damaged, but the writing was still legible, cramped columns of dates, names, locations. Her father's handwriting, careful and precise. "This is everything?" Rhys asked, settling down beside her. He'd retrieved the journal 2 days ago from where Ela had hidden it, sewn into the lining of a chest that had washed ashore near her village. She'd taken him there under cover of darkness, and they'd found it untouched, the Navy having searched her home but never thought to check the tide line. Everything he knew. 20 years of observations. Ela turned a page gently. Captain Elias Shaw uses Tortuga as a main base, refit his ships at Port Royal under a merchant alias. Samuel Vane prefers the Windward Islands, has connections with the Dutch governor at St. Eustatius. Mary Finch operates between Trinidad and Grenada, trades in both stolen goods and legitimate cargo. She looked up at him. There are 43 captains listed here, with their routes, their contacts, their safe harbors. It's a complete map of pirate operations in the Caribbean. Rhys whistled low. Your father was either very brave or very foolish. Both, probably. He thought knowledge was protection. Turns out it just made him a target. She closed the journal carefully. The question is, what do we do with it now? It was the question that had haunted them both since fleeing the retribution. The journal was power, but power had a way of destroying those who held it. In the wrong hands, it would lead to a massacre. In the right hands, it could protect the very people it documented. The trick was figuring out which hands were which. We could destroy it, Rhys said, not for the first time. Burn it, sink it, let the ocean have it, remove the threat entirely, and leave everyone vulnerable. The Navy doesn't need this journal to hunt pirates, Captain. They're doing that already. But if captains knew they were on a list, knew how much information existed about them, they could adapt, change their patterns, protect themselves. Isla traced a finger along the journal's worn cover. This could save lives if it's used right. Or it could start a war. If pirates learned that harbor masters have been documenting their movements, that merchants have been informing on them, trust in every port will collapse. It'll be chaos. It's already chaos. Isla's voice was sharp. The Navy is executing suspected pirates without trial, torturing merchants for information, destroying villages that won't cooperate. My parents weren't the first casualties, and they won't be the last. At least if we warn people, they have a chance to fight back. Rhys knew she was right, but the weight of the decision sat heavy on his shoulders. He'd spent 9 months avoiding exactly this kind of responsibility, this kind of connection to the world. Now here he was, holding knowledge that could affect the lives of hundreds, maybe thousands of people. There's someone who might help, he said slowly. Captain Elias Shaw, your father mentioned him. I know Elias, sailed with him years ago before I went independent. He's got respect among the pirate clans, runs a sort of unofficial council in Tortuga. If anyone could distribute this information without starting a panic, it's him. You trust him? As much as I trust anyone. Which isn't saying much. Rhys stood, brushing sand from his breeches. But we're not going to solve this sitting on a beach. We need to get to Tortuga, and we need to do it without the Royal Navy catching us. That proved easier said than done. Over the next week, as they sailed north toward Tortuga, they spotted Navy vessels 3 times. Each time, Rhys had to use every trick he knew to avoid engagement. Sailing close to reefs where the deeper draft frigates couldn't follow. Using the knowledge of local waters that only years of experience could provide, Isla proved invaluable. She had a sharp eye and sharper instincts, spotting sails on the horizon before Rhys did, suggesting courses he hadn't considered. More than that, she'd become a true partner in managing the ship. The Hollow Mercy, which had felt like a tomb for so long, now felt alive again, purposeful. You're a natural sailor, Rhys told her one evening as they shared a simple meal of salt pork and ship's biscuit. And your father was right. You should have been a captain. Maybe I still will be. Isla smiled, but there was sadness in it, though I never imagined becoming one like this. Fugitive from the law, sleeping on a pirate ship, eating food that's more weevil than biscuit. Glamorous life, isn't it? Rhys said with a rare chuckle. Welcome to freedom. It tastes like stale bread and looks like the wrong end of a noose. Still better than being tied to a mast. Isla met his eyes across the dim cabin, lit only by a single lantern swaying with the ship's motion. And better than being alone. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Rhys looked away first, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. Over the weeks together, something had shifted between them. What started as reluctant rescue had become partnership. And partnership had started to become something else. Something Rhys wasn't ready to name. "We should reach Tortuga tomorrow," he said, changing the subject. "You'll need to stay out of sight when we dock. The port is crowded, lots of eyes, and we can't risk someone recognizing you from a wanted poster." "Do you think Captain Gaines has spread the word that far?" "I'd bet my ship on it. He struck me as the thorough type. Vengeful, too. Men like that don't forget." Rhys stood, stretching his back. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be complicated." But sleep didn't come easily that night. Rhys lay in his hammock, strung up on deck under the stars, and thought about the path that had led him here. 9 months ago, he'd wanted nothing more than to fade away, to let the ghosts have him. Now he was sailing toward danger with a woman he'd sworn not to save, carrying information that could reshape the Caribbean's underworld. Willem's ghost whispered in the wind, and for once, Rhys thought he could make out the words, "About time you remembered how to live." "Captain!" Morning brought Tortuga into view. A sprawling port town, clinging to the northern coast of Hispaniola, like barnacles on a ship's hull. It was a place of contradictions. Officially French, practically lawless, where pirates drank alongside merchants and everyone pretended not to notice. The harbour was crowded with vessels of every description, from sleek sloops to heavy merchant brigs, all flying flags of convenience that meant nothing and everything. Rhys guided the Hollow Mercy to a berth at the far end of the harbour, away from the main docks where Navy informants were most likely to lurk. As he'd instructed, Isla stayed below, hidden in the cabin with the precious journal. "I'll find Elias and bring him back here," Rhys said through the cabin door. "Don't open this for anyone but me." "Understand. I'm not a child, Captain." "No, but you're a wanted woman worth a considerable bounty. Tortuga may be pirate-friendly, but gold is gold. Stay hidden." He heard her sigh of frustration, but she agreed. Rhys locked the cabin from outside, pocketed the key, and went ashore. Tortuga assaulted the senses. The smell of rum and sweat and rotting fish mixed with tropical flowers. Music spilled from a dozen taverns, competing shanties and bawdy songs. Men and women of every nation mingled in the narrow streets, speaking a dozen languages, unified only by their mutual disregard for authority. Rhys made his way to the Crossed Cutlasses, a tavern on the waterfront that had been Elias Shaw's unofficial headquarters for as long as Rhys had known him. The building was 2 stories of weathered wood and cracked plaster, with a sign showing 2 swords locked in eternal combat. Inside, the air was thick with pipe smoke and the sound of gambling. Elias Shaw sat at a corner table, holding court with a group of rough-looking men and one woman whose scarred face marked her as veteran of more than one fight. He was a big man, gone to fat in middle age but still dangerous, with iron-grey hair pulled back in a queue and eyes that missed nothing. When he spotted Rhys, his weathered face split in a grin. "Rhys Calder, heard you were dead. Viva took your crew, they said, and you went mad from grief." He gestured to an empty chair. "Glad to see the reports were exaggerated." "Only partly," Rhys said, sitting down. "I need to talk to you, privately." Elias's expression sobered. He dismissed his companions with a wave, waiting until they were alone before speaking. "You look like a man with heavy cargo. What's the trouble?" Rhys leaned forward, keeping his voice low. "I need to ask you something first. 3 weeks ago, did you hear about a Navy captain named Bartholomew Gaines tying a woman to a ship and setting her adrift?" Elias's face darkened. "Aye, I heard. Barbaric, even for the Navy. Said she was a pirate sympathizer. Why? Because I pulled her off that ship. And because she's got information that affects every captain in the Caribbean, you included." For the next hour, Rhys explained everything. The journal, the detailed records, the Navy's hunt, the storm and chase. Elias listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. "Sweet mercy," he breathed when Reese finished. That's a powder keg you're carrying, my friend. I know. That's why I came to you. This needs to be handled carefully. If word gets out wrong, if captains start turning on each other, suspecting every merchant and harbour master of informing, it'll tear apart every alliance we've built. Elias rubbed his face. But if we don't warn people, if the Navy gets that journal, they'll use it to systematically destroy us all. Exactly. Reese leaned back. So what do we do? Elias thought for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. Finally, he said, we call a council. Get the major captains together, the ones with sense and influence. We show them what exists, let them know their operations have been documented, and we give them the choice of what to do with the information. Make copies, destroy the original, whatever they decide. But it has to be their decision, not ours. That'll take time. And every day we wait, the Navy gets closer. Then we move fast. I can get word out, have captains here within a week. But Reese, you understand what you're asking? You're putting yourself and this woman in the middle of a gathering of the most dangerous people in the Caribbean. If even one of them decides the bounty on her head is worth more than solidarity, she deserves protection. She's lost everything because she wouldn't betray people she didn't even know. That kind of loyalty is rare. Elias studied him with knowing eyes. She's not just cargo anymore, is she? You've got feelings for this woman. Reese wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he said, she gave me a reason to keep living. That's worth something. Worth your life? Maybe. I guess we'll find out. Elias clapped him on the shoulder. You always were too noble for your own good, Reese. It's why you never got truly rich as a pirate. Too much conscience. He stood. Bring her here tomorrow night after dark. I'll have started spreading word by then. And Reese, watch your back. The Navy has informants everywhere, and Captain Gaines has a long memory. Reese returned to the Hollow Mercy as evening fell, the tropical sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He unlocked the cabin to find Isla pacing like a caged animal, her relief at his return obvious. It's been hours, she said accusingly. I thought something had happened. Negotiations took time, but it's done. Elias is calling a council of pirate captains. 1 week from now we present the journal and let them decide how to handle it. And you trust all these pirates to make the right decision? No, but I trust them more than I trust the Navy, and more than I trust myself to make this choice alone. Reese poured himself a cup of rum from a bottle on the table. We've done what we can, Isla. Now we wait and hope. But waiting proved harder than either of them anticipated. Over the next 3 days, tension built like pressure before a storm. Reese caught glimpses of men watching the ship, faces he didn't recognize. Twice, he thought he spotted Navy uniforms in the crowds on the docks. The feeling of being hunted, of walls closing in, made him jumpy. Isla felt it too. She stayed mostly below, but her frustration at confinement showed in sharp words and restless energy. On the 3rd evening, they argued. I can't stay locked in this cabin forever, she snapped. I'm going mad down here, better mad than dead. Or did you forget there's a bounty on your head? I'm not a fool, Reese, I know the danger, but I'm also not a prisoner. You saved me from one sentence just to give me another. I'm trying to keep you alive. By making me live like a ghost, like you've been living? She faced him, eyes blazing. You spent 9 months hiding from the world, and now you want me to do the same. But I won't, I can't. Living in fear isn't living at all. Her words hit harder than she knew. Reese turned away, jaw tight. You think I don't know that? You think I don't understand what I've become? Then stop it. Stop hiding me. Stop hiding yourself. We face this together, or what's the point? The point is keeping you alive long enough to see tomorrow. Why? The question was almost a shout. Why does it matter so much to you? Reese turned back to face her, and something inside him cracked. Because losing my crew broke me. Because I spent 9 months wishing I'd died with them. Because when I pulled you off that ship, when I saw you still breathing against all odds, it was like the universe giving me one more chance to save someone. To matter, to be more than just a ghost sailing an empty ship. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Because I can't lose you too. I won't survive it again. The cabin fell silent except for the gentle creak of the ship and the distant sounds of the port. Idla's anger drained away, replaced by something softer, more complicated. Reese, she said gently, stepping closer. You didn't fail your crew. Fever isn't something you can fight with a cutlass or outrun with clever sailing. It just is. And them dying wasn't your fault. I was their captain. Their lives were my responsibility, and you did everything you could. Just like you're doing everything you can for me now. She reached out, touching his arm. But you can't protect me from everything, and you can't bring back the dead by saving the living. That's not how it works. Then how does it work? The question came out raw, desperate. You just keep going. You honor them by living well, by not letting their deaths turn you into a ghost. She smiled sadly. You taught me that, whether you meant to or not. When you chose to save me, when you ran from the Navy, when you brought me here, you were choosing life. Don't stop choosing it now. Reese looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the woman he'd rescued, but the person she'd become to him. Companion, partner, friend. Maybe more than friend, if he was honest with himself. And she was right. He couldn't protect her by locking her away. He couldn't honor his dead crew by becoming dead himself. Tomorrow night, he said finally. When we meet with Elias and the others, you'll be there beside me. No hiding. Together. Together. She squeezed his arm, and for a moment they stood in the dim cabin of the Hollow Mercy, two survivors holding on to each other in a world that had tried repeatedly to destroy them both. Outside, Tortuga lived and breathed and plotted. The Navy hunted, Captain Gaines schemed, and somewhere the ocean rolled on, patient and eternal, but inside the cabin for just a moment there was peace. The night of the council arrived with a full moon painting the harbor silver. Reese and Isla made their way through Tortuga's twisting streets to the crossed cutlasses, where Elias had prepared a private room on the second floor. The tavern was crowded, but Elias's people had secured a clear path, and they slipped upstairs unnoticed. The room was large, lit by oil lamps, with a massive table at its center. Around that table sat 11 captains, representing the most powerful pirate operations in the Caribbean. Reese recognized most of them. Samuel Vane, a scarred man with cold eyes who ran the Windward Islands routes. Mary Finch, the woman from Elias's table, who commanded 3 ships and a crew of 60. Thomas Cord, young but vicious, who'd made his reputation in bloody raids along the Spanish Main. Others he knew by reputation only. Dangerous men and women who'd chosen freedom over law and paid the price in blood. They all turned as Reese and Isla entered, and the room fell silent. Idla stood straight, her chin high, meeting their stares without flinching. Reese felt a surge of pride at her courage. Elias stood at the head of the table. Captains, this is Reese Calder, who some of you know, and Isla Moreno, who you don't. They've brought information that affects all of us. Reese, show them. Reese placed the leather journal on the table. Daisla's father was a harbor master in Martinique. For 20 years, he kept detailed records of pirate operations that passed through his port. Names, routes, safe havens, contacts. It's all here. A murmur ran through the room, a mix of anger and concern. Why should we trust her? Thomas Cord demanded. For all we know, this is a Navy trap. She could be leading them right to us. The Navy tied her to a ship and left her to die, Reese said coldly. They murdered her parents. If she wanted to betray pirates, she had every chance. Instead, she's risked her life to warn you. Show us, Mary Finch said, her voice cutting through the tension. Let us see what's in that journal. Isla opened it, turning pages, reading entries aloud. With each name, each route, each safe harbor, the faces around the table grew more grave. When she finished, Samuel Vane spoke. This is worse than we thought. If the Navy gets this, they can destroy us systematically, one captain at a time. So we destroy it, Thomas Cord said. Burn it now, remove the threat, and learn nothing? Mary Finch shook her head. This tells us what's known about us, what we need to change. We'd be fools to waste that intelligence. We'd be fools to let it exist, Cord shot back. What's to stop her from making copies? From selling information to the highest bidder? Me? Reese's voice was quiet but carried steel. I'll vouch for her, and if anyone tries to harm her, they'll answer to me. 1 man against 11 crews." Cord laughed. "You must love her very much to make that threat, Calder." Rhys didn't deny it. Beside him, he felt Isla stiffen slightly, surprised, but she said nothing. Elias raised his hands. "Enough. We're not here to threaten each other. We're here to make a decision. I propose this. We spend tonight copying the relevant information each captain needs about their own operations. Tomorrow, we burn the original. The knowledge is dispersed, the weapon is destroyed, and we all adapt accordingly. And what about her?" Cord jerked his chin toward Isla. "She's the only one who knows everything in that book. She's a walking liability. She's under my protection," Rhys said firmly. "And Elias's. Any captain who has a problem with that can take it up with both of us." The room fell silent as captains exchanged glances, weighing risks and alliances. Finally, Mary Finch spoke. "I agree with Elias's proposal. We copy, we burn, we adapt. And the woman gets safe passage, because that's what honor demands. She could have sold us out, but didn't. That deserves recognition." One by one, the other captains nodded agreement. Even Thomas Cord, though he did so reluctantly. The decision was made. They worked through the night, captains and their trusted seconds, copying pages by lamplight. Isla helped, explaining her father's notations, clarifying routes and contacts. Despite the circumstances, there was something almost collaborative about it. A strange unity among people who usually competed and sometimes fought. As dawn broke over Tortuga, Elias carried the original journal outside to the beach. The captains followed, forming a circle. Idla stood beside Rhys, watching as Elias placed the journal on driftwood, poured rum over it, and struck a spark. The leather caught slowly, then burned bright. Pages curled and blackened, her father's careful handwriting dissolving into ash. Idla's hand found Rhys's, squeezing tight as 20 years of information disappeared into smoke. "It's done," Elias said quietly. "The knowledge lives on, but the weapon is destroyed." The captains dispersed, returning to their ships, preparing to implement the changes needed to keep ahead of the Navy. Mary Finch paused beside Rhys and Isla. "You did the right thing. In bringing this to us," she said to Isla, "takes courage to trust pirates with your life. Takes courage to be a pirate in the first place," Isla replied. Mary smiled, a rare expression on her weathered face. "If you ever want a ship of your own, come find me. I could use someone with your kind of courage in my fleet." As the sun climbed higher, Rhys and Isla walked back to the Hollow Mercy together, exhausted but relieved. The journal was gone, the information dispersed, and for the first time in weeks, the weight of carrying that secret was lifted. "What now?" Isla asked as they reached the ship. Rhys looked at her, this woman who'd crashed into his life and refused to let him stay dead. "Now we sail, find somewhere quiet, somewhere the Navy won't think to look. Figure out what comes next, together." He thought about Thomas Cord's words, about loving someone enough to threaten 11 pirate crews. He thought about the 9 months he'd spent as a ghost, and the weeks since, where he'd felt alive again. He thought about the choice between solitude and connection, between safety and risk, between existing and living. "Together," he confirmed. "If you'll have a haunted pirate captain with more baggage than sense." Isla laughed, the sound bright in the morning air. "I'm a wanted fugitive carrying the ghosts of murdered parents. I think we're evenly matched." They boarded the Hollow Mercy, preparing to cast off. As Rhys raised the anchor and Isla unfurled the sails, he felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. He felt hope. The ship caught the wind, gliding out of Tortuga's harbor toward open water. Behind them, the port disappeared into the haze. Ahead, the Caribbean stretched endless and blue, full of danger and possibility. Captain Rhys Calder, the lonely pirate who'd found a woman tied to a mast, was lonely no more. The ghosts were finally quiet, laid to rest by the simple act of choosing to live. The sea had decided both their fates that day he'd stumbled across the judgment. And the sea's decision had been clear. They would survive together. For whatever time they had left, the Hollow Mercy sailed into the morning sun, no longer hollow, no longer seeking death, but embracing the messy, dangerous, beautiful reality of life. Two survivors, two souls who'd been condemned and saved, steering toward an uncertain future with nothing but each other and the wind in their sails. It was enough. More than enough, it was everything.